We're here. Here we are.
Dude, is it me or is like your background getting more involved? Has that art always been there? I don't think so.
It's just messier.
Really? I don't recognize the art. Maybe I'm just not paying enough attention.
We did put the pictures up. Those are my kids' art.
Yeah, those are masterpieces back there.
Yeah.
I'm feeling all kinds of emotions.
And you switched Biggie for Tupac again.
Yeah, I'll do that again soon. I like to rotate. So eventually I'll bring him back down here.
I have a question for you about that. You have Biggie and Tupac.
And MF Doom.
You do. You have Doom. So
huge MF Doom.
So, but here's the real question: why do you not have Hammer?
Well, I'll say this: the rappers that hang on my walls are all deceased, and so may Hammer live a long time. And part of that is like me not investing in a painting. Like for example, I think Kanye West is one of the transformative artists of all time, and I admire his artistry, and that's where it ends. But like, he's alive and still capable of many antics, and so while he's around, if I'm gonna forego the artwork investment. And so that's kind of how I think about it. Like, I love, as you know, like I love Nas and Jay-Z, but I won't invest in their paintings because they're still out there. They get in trouble, do something sketchy, pull a Bill Cosby on me or something, and then I got to burn it down.
So you only invest in posthumous rappers who have not completely destroyed their own vibe.
And not just rappers too. Like I've got like other historical figures of like Latino history, South American history, and they're all deceased because you just never know, man. And I want someone's story to be complete before I display them in my home. That's just kind of the way I think about it.
Got it. So you sort of have your own rule against perpetuities going there.
Yeah, it's kind of like a rule against perpetuity. Yeah. Now, there are some iconic figures back there that are still alive. Like I've got a Stacey Abrams candle back there, and I've got SpongeBob SquarePants, who's alive and well, of course.
Yep.
And Patrick Star, but they have transcended greatness and have bypassed any capacity for evil doing, and so they're here.
Perfect. Yeah. All right, well, let's talk about our guest.
We got a big one today. We got a big fancy guest.
Yeah, Kristin Sverchek, the General Counsel of Lyft, which is. I feel like we were like fanboying the company.
We were yeah, we were a little fanboy. I do love the app. I love the app. I like the company. Like their ethos is cool. My former boss's boss at the Justice Department is the GC at Uber, and I think Uber's a cool company too, and he's great. And Tony's one of the smartest lawyers I've ever been around. And I have a great close friend, Maria Arguello, who I've known for 1,000 years, was a big fancy exec at Uber. It's a cool company, but like touch and feel wise, like Lyft just does something different to me. I don't know what that is, but like it just does.
It could be the roots, right? The roots of Uber are like limo type town.
Oh,
and so like large SUV.
Yes, black cars.
Lyft's roots are. Like you said it when we talked to Kristin, like your friend's car, with a pink mustache on it, like more, it's just a different approach and to a similar problem or a similar thing they were trying to solve.
Yeah, for sure. Do you remember the first time you did a app-based ride?
Definitely. I was weirded out by it.
Hit me up with the story.
I was in Washington, D.C.
Me too.
And so I have two memories. I have since moved off of Uber to Lyft, but I was using the first experience was Uber. They were first to market. I was at a restaurant with a friend in DC, and it was pouring rain. And I was like, do you need a ride home to him? And he was like, no, I'll just grab an Uber. I was like, what are you talking about? And he's like, it's a town car that will come pick me up. And I was like, first of all, I wasn't, we weren't in like in our 40s. This felt very expensive. Like I was like, what do you what are you gonna pay? Like $100 for a ride home?
A limousine service?
And it just pulled up and took him home, and he like got out of the rain, and he was like, no, it's right here. And then I was lost one time. I forget how it happened. I was lost and walking around DC, and I had no idea where I was. And I was like, all right, I'm gonna try this Uber thing. And I just tried it, and it like bailed me out. I was lost. And ever since then, it just became more and more and more ubiquitous,
Yeah, for sure. Same here. My first experience in a ride share or whatever car hailing service was Uber. It was in DC. It's before I moved there. So it's a long time ago. Before I moved there the last time, I was visiting and had dinner with a friend, a lady friend. And after dinner, she was still an up and comer. So we went back to her house. This story's taking.
Where are you going with this?
We went back to her house. She's like a tremendous cook, and there was like some desserts involved. And after dinner, actually, it was my birthday. I'm pretty sure about this. Anyway, long story short, went to her house, had dessert. She showed me some crazy sneakers. As you know, I'm like a sneakerhead. Now it's like 1 a.m. So I'm like, damn, how do I get a cab from this like row house road? I got to walk out to whatever street to get a cab and get back to the hotel. And she's like, no. I'll just call you a black car or something like that. And I was like, same reaction. Like, what are you, a millionaire? You live in a basement. Like, calm down. And sure enough, a Lincoln Town car showed up, took me to the hotel, and I texted her when I got there. I said, how much did that cost you? So I can like, whatever, like PayPal you or something. And she's like, $3. Because back then it was so cheap. It was so cheap. So I took a Lincoln Town car or whatever it was back to the W Hotel in downtown DC from like, I think she was in Columbia Heights, man, for $3.
That's amazing.
Yeah, now it's a fortune, but
this is a super interesting conversation with her. Kristin was at Lyft like from zero. Her team's 150 people now. So
yeah, that's wild.
Public company, it's completely different. She's been through everything, and the company's changed so much. The jobs changed so much. We talk with her.
Pandemic.
We talk with her about like when someone first started talking about autonomous vehicles. It's earlier than you would think.
Yeah.
Inside Lyft, and strategic for them, and so what a ride for her.
Yeah, a hell of a ride, man.
Yeah. All right,
let's do it, man.
Here it is. All right, here we are.
We're here.
Data Protection Breakfast Club with Kristin Sverchek, who is the GC at Lyft, and Pedro, you're on your third recording of something today. You're the most popular.
I'm Hollywood today, man.
Person there is.
Hollywood, man. Listen, it's showbiz, baby. I got to do
it. So I want to start, Kristin. You're on maternity leave right now, so thank you, number one, for joining us during your leave.
Congratulations, by the way.
Yeah.
Thank you. Maternity leave number 3. So I've got it down to a science at this point.
Well, I want to talk about something related to that, not exactly, but what occurred to me when I was thinking about the fact that you were doing this with us while you were on leave. I think like something we've seen, or at least I've observed, is that over maybe the last few years, maybe 5-ish years, it feels like it's like more acceptable to bring your whole self to work. Have you guys observed that? Like, it feels that way, and bringing your whole life and your family, and maybe COVID accelerated that too.
Yes. So I guess, so backing up, I've been at Lyft for 8.5 years. And so like, I've even seen at the same company, the company culture change dramatically over the years. And I would say we were always one of those kind of bring your whole self, be authentic type companies. But I agree with the notion that like COVID was this kind of turning point where all of a sudden you were physically seeing, like we're looking into each other's houses right now. Like, before that, I'd never seen the homes of many of my coworkers, and you're seeing their kids, you're seeing their dogs. I see Pedro's dog. And that was like a huge difference. And it's been funny, we're a company with a lot of litigation. And even within that, like we're seeing judges in their chambers and at home. We're seeing our very fancy attorneys in their homes arguing. Like, this kind of stuff just has never happened before.
I logged in once to a Zoom call with a corporate counsel from WilmerHale, and I hadn't seen him, to your point, Chris, I hadn't seen him in months, and he had a massive beard. Like, it was like down to here, and I was like, where are you? What are you doing? It's so funny that you
So,
said too.
This was the hearing, one of the hearings I'm thinking of, and I won't out our outside counsel because he's fantastic and we love him, but he was in our like mock the day before. He had, scruffy face, baseball hat, like kind of a messy room. And the very next day for the hearing in front of the judge, super clean cut, the shelves behind him were immaculate. And we were teasing him about it afterward. We're like, whoa, you really got the place camera ready. And he's like, my wife, my kids, everybody helped. It was like a team effort. So like, imagine, like that just never was an area of focus before.
It's totally different.
I do want to say something about like bringing your whole self to work. I agree with Kristin that like there's definitely been, and you, Andy, that there's been some sort of awakening, right? Let me be gentle on this one. If you're Latino or Black or not in the normative group, it's still really hard to be your authentic self at work, because I am not. Just to be honest, I literally have to come to work every day. You see how I zip up my hoodie? I have to zip on my like work personality and then be this thing, which is an additional burden for me, by the way.
Yeah.
To make sure everyone feels comfortable and like they don't feel that like my energy is confrontational and all these other things, which like, means I'm not my authentic self at work. Because one of the examples I give is I'm Cuban, right? Like Cuban people, we just yell. Like that's just what we do. Like my mom, when she was alive, I don't think we ever spoke softly to each other in our life. We're just loud people, right? I can't behave certain ways at work. I can't be like demonstrative in ways that are natural to me. And I'm sure other people face even worse. But anyway.
It's such a good push. And, obviously Andy and I sit here in all our white privilege. And so, like, that's such a great push. I will say what I've experienced at Lyft over the last year, especially with like the coincidence of, all the Black Lives Matter, which obviously we're all going through right now, but last summer as well, was having a number of virtual town halls where people got like really raw and emotional. And that's actually happened more recently too with some of our Asian American team members, although it's been while I've been on leave. And so I've seen that more in a real and an authentic way, but like completely hear you that there's still an element of like, yeah, I have to behave in a certain way. I mean, I'll at least say, as a woman, that's always true too. Andy and I were just talking like right before you got on, Pedro, that like women talk about maternity leave in a different way than men do. And we've got lots of like caring and involved dads on my team for sure. So I empathize with what you're saying.
As a small company, I've seen the openness about bringing your whole self to work be something that people are talking about more. And that's one of the reasons I joined Alice, and one of the reasons I'm happy that I'm here. It's an openly discussed concept and idea, and it also sort of relates to what the company does, but I've seen that much more recently, this particular company as opposed to others, Pedro. And I don't think you're ever going to be able to maybe bring your entire self to work, like yelling or something that's cultural in a way, because you have to balance, right, doing work. But I will say this, one of the reasons, I know this, but like one of the reasons Facebook hired you, and one of the reasons, Salesforce hired you, is that you are outspoken. And so I think what you can't do is you can't go completely the other way as we are in this position of bringing our whole selves to work. I hope our companies, at least the three that are on here, are supportive of bringing your opinion to work. And we're not just gonna, we talk about this a lot, Pedro, we're not like lawyers that lob memos over a fence and then walk away. That's not how it works in our companies. And so there's a balance, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I'll say this, like outspokenness is a personality characteristic, right? It doesn't really tie to my identity or my cultural background. So like outspokenness can be a feat. And I also think it's overrated, by the way. I think there's a lot of smart people who aren't outspoken that don't get listened to because a loudmouths like me. But I guess where I was heading at, and I want to be really careful because I don't want to like act like Cuban people go around screaming and yelling at each other, because that's not what it is. But there is a different way of communicating, and I think just as effective, which has more friction in it by design, and is more kinetic, that makes a lot of Americans uncomfortable. And the feedback that you get, and I think African Americans get a lot of this feedback too in some ways, because people talk. And it's really about shrouding the idea of corporate culture with ensuring that the majority feels comfortable at work at the expense of the minority having to accommodate that comfort. And that to me is very frustrating. It happens at every company. It happens to me at this level of my career. And the lower you go down the ranks, like the more dangerous it is to be yourself, because the more easy it is to get rid of you. And so like, I think it's a real problem. But I also do agree that like, I mean, there's some basic principles about decorum. I just don't think they need to be tied to like cultural preference.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'll give a couple anecdotes. One, last summer when we were having a Black Lives Matter town hall with our co-founders, at that point in time, one of Lyft's corporate values was, quote, be yourself. And in that moment, Logan, our CEO, said, like, we're going to do away with that value because be yourself is putting the onus on the person. And we need to have the onus be on the company to actually like make it permissible for people to act however they want to act. So I loved that, because it was like, you can't, quote, be yourself if that's never going to be allowed in the corporate culture. And so, we've since pivoted away from that as like a core value. We want to, we care about belonging and inclusion, but we're not trying to put the burden on you to actually like figure out, how to show up in a way that sort of like jams that in. The other thing I will say, I was on a panel like several years ago, moderated by Deborah Rohde, who's this like amazing gender studies professor at Stanford who actually just passed away in the last couple of months. And I was wearing jeans with holes in the knees. And she looked at me and she was like, "You're allowed to wear that at work?" And I said, "Yeah, I mean, this is how everybody dresses where I work." And she's like, "Well, that's privilege." She's like, "Because I have students who would never dress that way because they would be afraid of how they would be perceived. And for you to get to dress that way, like, you should recognize the privilege." And I mean, I was like completely awestruck because I had just never considered it in that way before. So on the kind of be yourself, bring your whole self to work point, it was like even the ability to dress how you want to dress is part of that, I think, too.
That's so interesting. We're talking about ways, and you mentioned what your co-founder said in that town hall. Obviously Lyft has changed in a bunch of like really visible ways, like private to public, or things like that. Well, how else has it changed? You were discussing before we started recording about how your team is 150 people.
Yeah.
So how do you manage all of those kinds of things across a larger team over time? And what's it been like for you just generally with that level of change, over the course of the years?
Yeah, I mean, when I started at Lyft, we were 30 people total, and now we're 5,000 people total. And when I started, we were San Francisco only, and now we are all over the US and Canada. And, we were just rideshare, and now we've got all these other lines of business, including micromobility as well. And so what it means for me is like, my job is constantly different, like month over month, year over year. So it's like, yes, I've, quote, been in the same job for 8.5 years, but it's felt like I've really had, 20 different jobs over that period of time, because in the early days, personally, I was focusing obviously heavily on the legal substance. Now I'm focusing heavily on managing a team, motivating people, getting the best out of them, retaining them, hiring new good people, et cetera. And that's like just a fundamentally different job. One thing that I think has stayed true is culturally, we are a very open to feedback and tightly connected culture. And so like, you know, even for one of our co-founders to say something like this past year, like it's because I think we're fairly good at like keeping our eyes open, listening and learning and coming to the table with a bit of humility in terms of like, how can we improve? And I know like, you know, in the early days and thinking back to when I took my first maternity leave, like I didn't know how to manage people at all because you don't learn that in law school and you don't learn that really at a law firm. And so I've had to, you know, I've been humbled many, many times over that 8.5 years. And I'm sure I'm not at the end of the road there either.
Add it to the list of things they don't teach you in law school
Yeah.
about actually doing the job.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
How big a role has privacy played in like how you develop your team? Meaning like how much of a focus is it at Lyft?
Yeah. I would say it's a huge focus. Like it's interesting because, you know, we're a company obviously that has quite a bit of consumer data, and that's just necessary for us to do our work. Like we need to know, you know, where you are and where you're going. And, you know, maybe we optimize the experience by storing, you know, if you put in your home address or your work address or whatever it is. But so like that's been true since day one. And frankly, like, oh,
Siri didn't get that randomly.
When Siri goes off, I've had that happen with, you know, I wear one of these things too. And like, it's so creepy because speaking of privacy, you're like, oh, you were listening to that, Siri.
This is unbelievable. Apple.
Yeah.
I'm calling Apple after this. We're gonna have
Thank you.
Next
Yeah.
thing you know, Siri's gonna go, Kristin, are you aggregating and anonymizing?
Yeah, exactly.
But you notice that was just random, right? Like
yes.
I'm just in here and there she goes.
No, I mean, it's happened to me where I've been, you know, completely not touching my watch in any way, which is like, it makes it all the scarier. It's not even as if you accidentally pressed a button.
Sure.
Anyway, what profound thing was I saying about data privacy? Oh, so since we, you know, we have to have a lot of consumer personal information to do our jobs. It's something that even since the early days, you know, with a super small team, I was like, we've got to focus on this, because that's the kind of thing where even though privacy is like it's in my mind a shared function, you need, you know, Ing and product and other resources, like everybody's going to point the fingers at the lawyers if you haven't gotten it right, because, you know, what have you said in your policy, et cetera. And so in the early days, when everyone on my team was a super multifaceted, you know, kind of covering all ground person, we made sure to have somebody who had some background in privacy, you know, probably, gosh, I don't remember how long it was, 4+ years ago, we hired our first dedicated privacy person. And now we've got a number of them. And I recall right after we hired our first dedicated person, there was a negative information article about our privacy practices. And so I was so happy to have this person on it to just like handle it, work with the comms team, you know, work with our data engineers, et cetera. But like, it's never far from my mind, because you see how many big brands have gotten into trouble with respect to their practices.
You guys, I mean, you mentioned it at the beginning, but like Lyft deals with such sensitive information, particularly like you said it, like people's comings and goings, right?
Yeah.
One of the interesting things to me about having that information is like the potential for it to be used for good, right? Like just better, like, I don't know, transportation efficiency and et cetera. Like how in the context of making sure people's identities and behavior patterns are kept confidential and private, like how do we balance that need and requirement with like what I think is probably some pretty good benefits to like looking into that data and seeing what we learn?
Yeah, well, I mean, you guys said the magic words earlier, which were like anonymized and aggregated. And, you know, it's obviously the world's upside down right now because of COVID, but, you know, I'm sitting here in the Marina District in San Francisco, and usually I go down to Soma to work, which is like a pretty regular traffic pattern, right? So when we think about incentives, and when we think about like, you know, where do we want to nudge drivers to be positioned, or, you know, where do we think we'll get the most efficiency from shared rides, which of course are not happening right now. knowing that there's like a bulk of people that travel from the marina down to Soma every day, it is helpful. So we can know that without knowing, hey, where are you, Pedro, specifically going? We just know there's a number of people traveling in that direction. So the information can be of use in optimizing user experience, even without knowing like what any one person does.
One of the things I've noticed, and this is super anecdotal and it means nothing, but I've noticed it, is that surge pricing on both on the rideshare apps. Obviously, there's like specific times, and sometimes it makes perfect sense. I understand surge pricing on New Year's Eve at 12:01 a.m. or whatever, or New Year's Day, right? Like I get it.
Yeah.
But sometimes, and again, this is anecdotal, so I don't want to like draw too many conclusions, but I get the sense that like where you're going also impacts pricing, and maybe that I used a lot of Uber and a lot of Lyft, and so like for example, trips to the airport tend to be seem to be priced some way to me. Trips from neighborhoods that are maybe less desirable sometimes take way longer and seem to be priced funky. And what I mean by less desirable is what people would perceive as more dangerous or whatever. All of that's anecdotal, and maybe I'm wrong, but like, is there research going into figuring out if there's something to what I just said? And are you guys involved in that?
Yeah. Actually, I speak for both rideshare companies. There's, see,
Yeah,
cute
we got
kid.
a lot of guests today. This is
Yeah,
good. I had to
bring
set
your whole self. Both rideshare companies have been involved in a number of academic studies about like, and I think what you're getting to actually is pricing discrimination. And that's obviously like something that both of us, I think, would say we would try not to do. And obviously you can have practices that are unintentionally discriminatory in nature. But yes, that is something that we've looked at with an eye toward preventing. But really the idea behind like surge pricing is pretty simple. It's like a supply and demand kind of notion, which is like, if you've got a lot of people requesting rides and not a lot of drivers to provide them, how do you incentivize the drivers so that, they can make a match with the riders?
Right. No, that makes perfect sense. And I'm glad to hear that it's something that you guys think about, because it's important. And to your point, like it's not always like discrimination is not always intentional, but the impact is the same, right? Like if
Yes.
and I don't think anyone's out to I don't think anyone's out to discriminate on purpose. At least not at like the company level, but it is something that I think we have to think about.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, like, how, like, when thinking about those issues, right? Like, tie it back to privacy specifically, like, when you think about whether or not something is a discriminatory practice intentionally or unintentionally, is it important to know like who's being affected? Like, because we talk about aggregated and anonymous. Well, it's hard to know what your like race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status is without some data points, right? And to find out if, like, we want to know if there's a disparate impact on Black people, we have to know that they're Black, right? Like, and they're being affected, right? Or is there another way?
Well, so this is what you are talking about is actually one of the reasons it's pretty hard to study this stuff, is because a lot of that those statistics have to be inferred, because we're not asking writers when they sign up for our platform, what ethnicity are you?
Right.
So you don't have really like perfect data. You can go by, zip code, socioeconomics, and or demographics, things like that. But at the end of the day, you're going to be doing a little bit of guesswork.
A little bit of guesswork, yeah. How has obviously your business is one of the ones that's like the most that's significantly impacted by like COVID-19, right? Like people just stopped doing things. Like, how'd you ride through that? That must have been really hard.
It was tough. And, knock wood, it feels like we've come through that. But, it was a pretty surreal experience. March 2019, we went public. March 2020, we see all of a sudden our volume just kind of grind to a halt, and obviously like our stock price went along with that. And being inside at the company, like you have to have a lot of faith. For me, it was like, I believed then, and I still believe now in the fundamentals of the business. But of course, there was plenty of attrition, and we did a layoff in April 2020. And so the makeup of the company changes greatly, because plenty of people are going to say, like, I want to go elsewhere. Like, I don't know if this business is going to survive. And we have a lot of smart people with skill sets that are attractive to other tech companies, and even those like closely related, right? Like if you don't have faith, maybe you hop over to DoorDash because you're like, well, their business is booming right now. But I'm proud, like we were able to retain a lot of really good people. And I think since it turned 2021, we've seen the business bounce back quarter over quarter, and obviously that's in our earnings releases. And like, I think people are starting to feel good again, but the crazy morale swing from 19 to 20 was something that like I never would have predicted.
I use more Lyft than Uber. I'm just going to put that out there.
Well, thank you.
I really do. And Tony, who's the GC at Uber, he used to be my boss when I worked at the Justice Department. So I know him too.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
He's a great guy. He's a great guy. And so I love him too. And we got to get him on here at some point. But like,
I use more Lyft than Uber too, and I think like here's a reason, and one reason only is I just like the vibe better. And
that's really what it is.
I know that sounds a little nutty, right? But I did want to ask you about this, Kristin. Like I was attracted to Alice, to join Alice, because they do such a good job branding, and they have a good voice, and have a good feel. And Lyft is like, did you recognize that right away? Like it's, and you mentioned like the co-founder, like adjusting and thinking about the people, and it just feels like there's that same shared sentiment.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's real. Like I was outside counsel to the company for about 2.5 years before I joined as GC. And so I had gotten to know our co-founders in that period of time. Obviously, I've gotten to know them much better in the 8.5 years, and we've worked at the same company. But when I was there outside counsel, they were like one of my favorite clients. They were difficult and demanding, but they were very good at expressing their appreciation. And, they understood when I said, hey, this is just like something we can't do, or this is a bridge we shouldn't cross. They listened. They had a lot of faith in me to like figure things out, because my background is corporate transactional. And so in those days, that was the capacity I represented them in. And they started, asking me regulatory and insurance questions. And it's like, I don't know the answer to this. And they're like, just figure it out. We trust you. And I think having that kind of like working environment brings out the best in people. And so when they asked me if I'd be interested in coming on board full time, they're probably the only client that I would have left my job for. I wasn't looking to make a move in any way. And, it's such a cliche phrase, but I think it's true that like the tone comes from the top. And so there's a lot of like-minded people, and that's not to say like it's, everybody drinking the same Kool-Aid, but I do think there's like this shared vision for what the company can achieve and what it should be like to work there. And I think and hope like that shown externally as well.
It starts to matter.
Sorry, Andy, I think you're right. Like it's just the vibes are better. I don't know. Yeah, just Uber feels more corporate to me. Yeah. I don't know if that's the right way to frame it, but like I just feel like I'm catching a ride with a friend on Lyft in a way. I don't know.
It used to be, that's like one of our old taglines. So
is it really?
We did something right. It was your friend with a car. Yeah. But this is like 2012. So obviously that branding stuck with you, which is good.
Yeah, I'm here for that. How do you guys pick like? Well, you've been there since the beginning. I'm curious in like all these random things, but like I'm looking at the app right now. Like, how'd you land on this? It's not pink, right? Like, what's this color? What is this Lyft color?
I don't remember even what is the tile of the app right now, because I have the beta version. So mine is actually a different color than yours.
There you go.
Oh, the fuchsia.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like your title there, by the way. Give me a ride.
Oh yeah, that's the title of that box. Yeah.
So we have, two co-founders. I already talked about our CEO, Logan, our president, John, who's actually my boss, is like a very brand focused person. And he's the person responsible for, like, I don't know if you guys remember the pink fuzzy mustaches from the early days.
Yes.
And so he was the one who came up with that. And they linked up with this company, Car Stash, whose founder actually like later joined Lyft and still works at Lyft today. Okay. So this is like, these are all these long-term relationships. But pink was like, they liked it. It was lighthearted. It was friendly. And so we've always had like some degree of pink, in our corporate branding. But yeah, so I think my app is like teal right now. I gotta look.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Dave was really
my app is
impressed.
teal.
Dave
You
was
can see it.
impressed by the beta version.
There's
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
I want beta version.
So that's why when you said the color
My
of the app, I'm
Facebook
like,
is
I don't know.
yellow. Look at that, huh? But so yes, I love that. I
Yeah.
love testing too, by the way. I think it's so much fun.
Yeah.
Like giving feedback on app features and stuff. I do the same on Instagram. It's super fun.
Yeah.
I think your app works well, and like it was simple. I mean, Uber and Lyft's apps are similar, but they're not the same. And I agree with Andy. Like just look and feel, it just felt just casual, maybe. I don't know. It just felt like just better.
I think the business shows that, but then like I think as you go through your career, stuff like this starts to matter a lot more. When we're in a law firm or we're in one of our first, I was in-house at a company, one of many lawyers, and it just starts to feel very impersonal at some point. And then you start to really think about, well, okay, is the vision and the leadership of this company, are we aligned? Again, if I brought myself to work as a person, am I aligned with that vision? And that stuff has really just shown how much that matters. Like above all, you're managing over 100 people. Like it has to be that, or it has to be one of those things that pulls you, towards it.
Yeah. And, that's something that I struggle with as a leader, especially over the past year of COVID, because part of the cohesion, I think, on my team was the fact that like, we like being around each other. We like getting, we like solving tough problems together, like all in the trenches. And my team is San Francisco, Nashville, New York, and, a couple of folks scattered elsewhere. But like, in those places, there were, decent sized groups where we were all together. And so having everyone be a part over the last year, and particularly bringing on new people, it's much harder to establish that, through a Zoom.
Autonomous cars, like how are they affecting like the business? How are you guys thinking about this?
Can I quickly reframe? I think what I wanted to ask you about this was, when was the first time someone sort of like whispered about that? Because
Okay,
I have to imagine it wasn't what was going on the day you joined, right?
So it's funny because it wasn't, but it was pretty soon thereafter. Like I think within, I want to say maybe 2-ish years after I joined, we were starting to think about our autonomous strategy. So like if I go back to like probably 2015. So, it probably wasn't 2012, but it was probably 2015 and maybe before. I'm saying all these glowing things about our co-founders, but I'll say another, like they're transportation wonks. And so they were thinking about how is this going to affect our business early on. It's funny because I've been watching that documentary on Netflix about like the last Blockbuster, and it's all about how like Blockbuster had all these opportunities to compete with or acquire Netflix and they didn't. And I think like our co-founders were really conscious of the fact that like if we don't have a strategy here, this is the kind of thing that could take us out of business. And so like let's develop a strategy, very early on. And ours has been essentially a two-pronged one, which is in-house development. So we have our own facility in Palo Alto called Level 5, and then one of partnership as well. So we've partnered with folks like Waymo and others in this like open platform, basically, where, in Vegas, you can get Aptiv, I think they might have changed their name, but an Aptiv ride through the Lyft app, an autonomous ride. It's a short loop, but we've served a bunch of people through that. And so they, I give a lot of credit to them for being smart about making sure that we weren't just left behind and realizing this too late.
It's good to hear that it wasn't the finance person who was like, what if we didn't have drivers?
No.
A cost-cutting measure for autonomous vehicles.
No, it's heartening to know that it was strategic, right?
And what else? What else is interesting to me about this? And this has nothing to do with privacy, but it's interesting. Is like, who owns the fleets? Like, I guess it'll be you guys, right? Like, when we get to that point, like, because now it's not like driver-owned cars with like contract drivers. It's like you guys now own, right?
So this is another interesting thing we think and talk about. And obviously none of these are all open questions because we're not in that world yet. But, presumably you do have one single large fleet owner. And, I think TBD, whether that would be us or a third party or, what it looks like. But then you've got to think about things like warehousing and storage and maintenance in a way that's very different than the world that we know today.
I've got an idea, Andy. Let's start this app. And if anybody steals this, I'm coming for you. I'm a lawyer. But like, just like you guys contract drivers with cars, maybe you can just contract my car while it's parked in my garage, and I can just make it available. It gets the hell out of here and it goes to work while I'm sitting at the house. I'm a big fan of this.
That's definitely one model, but then a counterpoint to that is like, well, then like, do you really even want to have that car, or would you rather just be able to call that car when you need it? Because like, do you care about having the insurance and maintenance and storage obligations? And again, these are open questions. Like, I don't know the answer to them either. But these are all the things that we talk and think about.
I'm such a car guy though. Like I like cars, and I don't think there's enough people who like, I think, no knock to Tesla, but I call Teslas like microwaves on wheels, right? Like, that's not a car, like a car person's type of car, in my opinion, right? Like the Porsche, like Taycan, that's a car person's car, right? Electric car. Anyway, I think you're right and onto something. The majority of people actually lean towards the microwaves and not towards the like performance-y car thing. I just don't think there's enough of us. But as a car nerd, I wish I owned a car. Sorry, Andy, go ahead.
I just thought it was nice that brought us full circle, because it's really just the idea that your job changes all the time,
all the time.
It's just so wonderful for just the strength of keeping going with a company like that. It's awesome.
Well, that's, people have like asked me like, when are you going to leave? You've been there a long time. And it's like, I am so far from the end of dealing with interesting problems. And so, and I work with great people. Like, why would I leave? Where is the grass greener?
Yeah.
I love that.
Or more fuchsia, but like, that's super dope. And look, congrats on riding it through. And I mean that for all of Lyft, because it's a cool company that does like cool stuff. And like, we were talking at the beginning about like bias and like empowerment, and in a lot of ways, I know there's a lot of controversy around like the contract worker piece of things, but like, it's been a huge economic opportunity for hundreds of thousands of people to earn a living or supplement a living. And I have Lyft drivers in my own family, right? And so like, shout out for like sharing the success with people.
Thank you. And by the way, that's very much been my personal experience. My Lyft rides, I love talking to the drivers and hearing about what makes them tick. And, the consensus, like, this is, my own personal experience, but folks love it. Like, they love having that very easy income opportunity. And, some of them are full-time, many of them are doing other things, and this is enabling them to do other things. Exactly. People who are able to quit their jobs their full-time jobs that they hate, and they want to work on photography or dance or, whatever it is, not always in a creative field, of course, but oftentimes. And they're able to do that because they have, this easy income opportunity. We've heard that from lots of like the LA folks, that like, the kind of starving actor job is not waitressing anymore, or waiting tables. It's being a Lyft driver. And so like, for me, I've gotten a lot of gratification out of feeling like, you know, we do provide something that makes it easy for folks to earn.
I'm with it.
Kristin, we're gonna let you get back to your life, to your
Yeah.
children.
Thanks for hanging out with us on your maternity leave. That's super
Thank you
amazing.
so
You didn't
much.
have
It was great to talk to you. We
It's
didn't
good
touch,
to talk to you too.
we didn't touch Animaniacs at all, so maybe Pedro and I will do that in the intro.
And you know what else didn't happen today? I didn't curse one time. I don't think so. Amazing.
I don't think you did either. It's funny because
Time,
I
Pedro.
used to have such a filthy mouth, but you know, having 3 small kids, you really have to, because I don't want to have the kids that just drop F-bombs. So my friends do. So I've had to clean it up. Yeah.
All right. Well,
Thanks,
Brad. We'll drop a couple in the intro.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All
Thanks,
right.
Kristin.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah,
See you
thanks.
guys.
See ya.